So here we go. So today we're going to talk about CTSD, what I call COVID trauma stress disorder. And let's just jump in. As always, you always start any kind of webinar. This is for myself and anybody that's ever going to do webinars, because I didn't do this for years. Always put your contact info at the beginning, because people, they may have just kind of stumbled across it on Facebook or something. So my main website, as you know, is nfnlp.com. Also drwillhorton.com, which should be launched this week. It's being repackaged. And of course, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and all that other stuff. And I've lately always stole a saying from a group I used to hang with, which is the only easy day was yesterday. All right, today we go to work. All right. So as we always get started, what can I learn new today? All right, how can I grow today? Ask yourself these questions as we get ready to do this. What can I do different today? How can I add to my self-worth? And that'll tie into what we're talking about here. And how can I be of service today? It's one of the reasons I do this. All right. So what is COVID stress, right? Well, a lot of it has to do with what we're being bombarded with constantly, and the analogies that they're giving us, that it's a war, right? And war brings up all kinds of images in our minds, We just listened to that song, and it was about the Vietnam War, right? And war is death, destruction, pain, suffering, isolation. Those of us that were in, it's the isolation from your friends and family when you're deployed, things like that. So this stress is being built, right? So that's what we're going to talk about. But before we get started, what are the two main things that they talk about? Well, number one is acute stress disorder. And this is what happens after you have a traumatic situation in your life, and it happens right afterwards, right? PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is different than ASD, acute stress disorder. Excuse me, I throw around, acronyms and short terms, but for most people, if you get a traumatic event, it will work itself out through time. Usually, depending on the trauma, 30 to 60 days. It depends on the trauma again. It will kind of dissipate out. If it doesn't, then we get into post-traumatic stress disorder, and then the symptoms have to last longer than a month and be ongoing. And I say that because right now we're in month 6 of COVID, right? Of what's going on. It actually started in February. We started hearing about it. March, it escalated. And then, everything hit the fan in mid-March. So we got March, April, May, June, July, going into August. So we're entering into the 6th month, okay, of ongoing constant stress. And so what are the characteristics of acute stress disorder, ASD? Severe anxiety. Do people have that right now, right? Is there disassociation? You feel detached from yourself. You kind of have dissociative amnesia, remembering various details from what's going on. It's like, and in this case, I should have thrown up there Dyschronometria, where you lose track of time, so you can't remember what was done when and because it's ongoing, and especially if you've been locked down from your job and the normal escapes that we have, the movies, the gyms, restaurants, whatever it is. People with acute stress have flashback episodes, right? And this one's kind of interesting with what's going now. You don't need to have flashbacks. All you got to do is have the internet or TV, because they're constantly reminding you, right? And how many people are having nightmares and difficulty sleeping? Is anyone having poor concentration because of this, right? Hypervigilance. You can't let your guard down, right? And again, a lot of this is being bombarded with you, right? See something, report something, and are we avoiding and withdrawing from people, places, or experience that are reminiscent of the trauma? Well, now they've placed the trauma everywhere, and it's, whatever they're calling safer at home or whatever they're calling it. So it's reminding you. So that's acute stress. So I'd say we were in that for the first, probably April, right? April, going into May. And then what happens when you're in acute stress, guess what? You lose your cognitive factors. You become highly suggestible. You suspend disbelief. you're open to commands from trusted authority figures. And once accepted, you don't want to break from it. You know, it's like, and excuse me, I also forgot to put in the fact that you compounding of suggestions. You do the first suggestion, you build on it, you build on it, like build on it, build on it, build on it. And now we've had a good 6 months of compounded suggestions. So it keeps going in. And again, you've suspended disbelief, you're open to commands from authority figures, whether it's the government or medical figures or whatever. And then once you accept it, it's tough to break it, right? And those of us that do hypnosis, NLP, coaching, anybody ever dealt with a smoker or any kind of addiction, those beliefs, they go deep, right? Now, what is post-traumatic stress as opposed to acute stress? Well, you still have the negative thoughts and experience and heightened alertness to danger after the trauma, right? And so we get these intense feelings of isolation, negative mood, trouble concentrating, just like in the acute stress, right? But this seems to be delayed onset and goes on for months after the traumatic experience. Well, we're not done with the traumatic experience yet, but we're already moving into post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So how are these two different? Well, of course, acute stress is right after the event, right when it happens. You know, you have a car wreck, you're in acute stress, you're, you know, and that's from day one to about, you know, about, they say 28 days, so about a month, but it starts getting away. Maybe right after the car wreck, you don't want to get in the car, you don't want to drive. But again, usually the symptoms begin to go away, right? And again, in acute stress, it's between 3 days and 4 weeks. They kind of dissipate naturally. You work through it, maybe you talk through it, it just kind of gradually begins to dissipate, if you will, unless you're really reminded of it, right? But with post-traumatic stress, after that month, you keep re-experiencing it, right? And, you know, you can do therapy. There's a lot of things you do. Psychotherapy seems to work with some PTSD, depends how it's done. There's some medications, which, you know, don't get me started on medications for this stuff. EMDR, eye movement, hypnosis, neurolinguistic programming, because it's restructuring how your brain's remembering the event. So similarities between acute stress disorder and PTSD, right? They usually happen with, could be physical violence or attacks, sexual assault, rape, terrorist attacks, exposure to death. This is what I wanted to get to. Neglect, emotional abuse, right? Life-threatening medical conditions. Okay, that's what we're doing. Severe injuries to yourself or others. And even with what we're going through, it really fits into almost like a natural disaster. And again, what they're linking it to, like the physical violence of what COVID does. It's the exposure to constant death, the emotional abuse of it, right? And so again, just something to think about. We go through acute stress and then it kind of dissipates, right? And then post-traumatic stress goes on after about a month and keeps going, right? So we're kind of stuck in between this. We haven't had time to process out, right? And we've added to the thing, what I call, this is actually a term, Dyschronometria. I didn't make that one up. It's a condition, it's a brain condition where you cannot accurately estimate the amount of time that has passed. This is important for us because for most of millennia, it's only been in the last couple hundred years that we actually measure time by a clock. You know, usually it was daytime, morning, the second was seasonal, you know, depending where you were. That's how our brains work. So this is still relatively new to us about the idea of a clock, right? And then even with that, a lot of us set our days by certain time markers in our day, you know, from getting up to going to work, driving to work, whatever it was, going to the gym, whatever it was. Maybe you had your weekend where you went to the movies or restaurants and that. So you begin to lose your time markers, right? Our arbitrary time markers are gone. You know, if we were locked down, you couldn't go to work. Well, that was a big time marker. You didn't drive to work. You didn't have your work things. all that. So we cannot estimate time. Do you lose track of time? Is it hard to think of what day it is, right? We bought those clocks. I can look at it right now. It says Wednesday afternoon, 12:19 p.m., July 29th, 2020. Because, you know, it begins to all wrap together, right? So Dyschronometria is added to it, right? And if you ever dealt with people with post-traumatic stress disorder, they do lose track of time, you know, especially like, to use the combat veteran thing, when you're deployed, every day is the same and yet different, you know, like constant, you know, it's long, boring days interspersed with moments of terror is how most people describe combat, right? And what are we going through now? Kind of rather, the days get to be the same with moments of external brought in, you know, the TV, the radio, CNN, everybody's just bombarding us, right? And so it's the same kind of thing with no end in sight. I was talking to my daughter when I was talking about Dyschronometria, and she was on the USS Nassau, and it deployed, I think it was 2004, 5, whenever it was, when they were, when the war was really picking up. And they were at sea for 279 days, right? 279 days at sea. And with no, you know, port calls, right? They were at sea, you know, and it was the longest combat deployment since World War II. They were on a war footing from the time they left Norfolk till it was over, 279 days, if I remember right. And she said the worst part was they had no idea when the deployment was going to end, right? And she'd been in the Navy for 7 or 8 years at that point, but she goes, the old timers, the old chiefs, and some of the officers were freaking out because they used to have time markers when you deploy. You go to sea for about 6 months, give or take, you know, but you usually about every few weeks you pulled into a port call. Well, they had none of that going on, you know, and the one time they did pull into something, they couldn't get off the ship. They were just restocking, right? So you lose time markers. So it's kind of like, you know, usually when combat troops deploy, they have time markers, right? But this is like being in a long-term dysfunctional, abusive relationship. We don't know when this is going to end. And they keep saying, you know, the next wave is coming. This is coming. You know, the new normal, all this really cool hypnotic language I'm saying play out in front of us. So we're experiencing this, right? And so this COVID lockdown, it's relentless, it's ongoing, it seems to be never ending. And again, comparing it to war, I think that's very important because we all have our images of war, right? It's the constant threat of painful death. I remember when they first started the lockdown and they were trying to get us to whatever they called it, safer at home, whatever it was. And it didn't work until they started showing us the images of people dying, but they kept stressing totally alone. Your family wasn't there at your bedside as you were passing. You couldn't get to your grandmother as she was dying. So it's an isolated, alone death, which really gets to some core fear, man. I mean, that is like, you know, and again, then you add in the Dyschronometria. There's no, oh, this will pass in a few weeks, we don't know. So this is what's going on. Again, and some of these analogies that they're seeing floating around, if it's done on purpose, it's brilliant. And if it's done just haphazardly, it still works quite well. Things like every day we're losing like whatever it is, 100 plane crashes a day or whatever they're due. Now, if you step back, you know, those of us that fly a lot, that's big fear. What would you be like if you're on a plane that's going to crash? And again, comparing it to war, it sets certain things in your head, right? And then a basic human need is connection. We are social creatures. That drives, one of the things I don't hide is this thing about acting like we are not social creatures. Our social system was developed to keep us alive. It is a basic human need, right? Those of us study addiction. One of the big things about an addiction, it breaks your connections. And, you know, and it's isolation reframed as, well, you're safe at home, but you're isolated, right? And it's kind of like, what if you don't have, what if you live alone? If you buy, one of my friends, you know, he moved down here, he was working on a movie, and he has a house down here. And when all this happened, you know, once the restaurant, his big thing was going out to eat at least twice a day, at least once a day, going to a restaurant. Now, you know, he could go pick up food and either eat it in his car or by himself. You know, my personal opinion, that's not safer at home. That's house arrest. But that's, yeah, I won't hide that, you know. And so there was no group connection. He couldn't go to his, you know, he's a gym guy. Well, the gym was closed. He couldn't go there. As I said, he makes movies. So his big thing was going to the movies. So, you know, he went to see every movie in town, right, at the Cineplex. Well, that's gone, right? And people say, well, you can watch stuff on TV. Well, it's not, you ever been in a movie, and if you go to the movies, sometimes it's just the people around you, even if you never say hi, it's this social connection. And again, the restaurants, the churches, the bars, the gyms, when they're closed, boom. And then of course they close schools, sporting events. A lot of these things are time markers for people. They're social connections for people. It's how you vent, it's how you grow. And once those were taken away, it can cause psychological disturbances, right? And then they add in shame and guilt to comply. You know, they're shaming you. Shaming, don't you care about other people? Don't you do this? Don't, I mean, that part's, you know, they're using shame and guilt. You know, sometimes fear is a virtue. You need to fear other people. That's the subtext of what's going on. You know, these people are going to kill you. So you got to be very careful of other people. I don't know about you, but that doesn't build a community. That doesn't build a society. And that doesn't, you know, help us grow as a group. And of course, now we're dropping back to reporting those who do not comply, right? Which those of us that understand HIPAA, there's all kinds of questions here in the States. I know we got Canadians here, but you have your own version of HIPAA up there. It's like, I still don't know how they're getting around that. If I'm not wearing a mask and you walk up and ask me why, you're the manager of the store, I don't know, you got your HIPAA forms. I need to sign all these HIPAA forms. But anyway, I digress, right? So anyway, but the big thing is shame and guilt and fearing other people, you know? So that's just what's going on. So I call it, you know, this COVID stress disorder. It's the constant exposure to death. You know, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I guess I finally said, well, what I really don't understand, because this person's really freaking out about it, and I was trying to help. And I'm like, what I really don't understand is, to put it bluntly, you act like we're not going to die anyway. I mean, I don't understand. I mean, I don't want to die today, but I mean, you know, I mean, Jesus Christ, I used to jump out of airplanes. But, you know, it's exposure to death, right? And almost like the flip idea of like, we are going to defeat death. But anyway, but it's the constant exposure to it, the pictures on TV, Facebook, whatever it is, right? Neglect in isolation. Again, what if you don't have friends or family around? What do you know, where are you getting your connection with people? I would describe it as emotional abuse from the media. That's just the way I describe it, but it's constant, it's ongoing. Why? Get you to watch CNN, MS, whatever you believe, from MSNBC to Fox News, doesn't matter. It's like, we have more in a moment. Stay tuned. You know, in case you haven't shit your pants yet, hold on, we've got more to come, right? You know, killer hornets, you know. I still think the alien invasion is next, but you know, whatever, right? And again, life-threatening medical conditions, and it's constant and ongoing, right? Severe injuries to yourself or others. And again, the media is constantly calling it's a war, it's a war, it's a war, right? And as someone I know from Europe pointed out, why do Americans especially declare war on everything? War on poverty, war on drugs, war on terror, right? We declare war on things which are you cannot defeat, right? It's just, and now war on this virus, right? So it's anyway, and so this is to me what I call COVID trauma stress disorder. And again, adding in Dyschronometria, you know, and one of the cures would be helping people reset their time clocks with some kind of time markers, whatever it happens to be. But I mean, is this ongoing, right? And then now, of course, we're talking about the new normal. And my fear, and this just wanted to put out there, we're creating a culture of post-traumatic stress disorder. That's going to be the new normal, right? Moving from acute stress to post-stress, right? Will this CTSD be the new normal? Okay? Will it be? I don't know. You know, but how can we help people if they're going through it? Well, first of all, do they even want to admit that they're going through some trauma? Are they losing it? Are they getting, is it getting to them? You know, and now that it's been, you know, going on 6 months, is it breaking everyone down, right? There's a reason if they're, you know, in psychological warfare, you know, it's the systematic breaking down of your psychological defenses. You know, it starts with usually sleep deprivation, right? When you see the things where they're constantly playing music so the people can't sleep, the bright lights, they go to sleep, they wake them up, right? So, well, they're not doing that to us consciously, but is it ongoing to us? So it's, and it's relentless, you know, it's relentless. So I just wonder if that's some of it, you know, can we get people to I'm not saying don't take it serious, but put the locus of control back on what you have the locus of control over. So that's just what I'm calling COVID trauma stress disorder. Is this going to be the new normal, right? And again, you know, and what are the big thing when I talked to a couple people that asked me about it is, what's the secondary gain? Is there any secondary gain that feeds into it? This could be painful. But I will say this, have you noticed the people that never go to the gym are the ones saying, keep the gym shut down. They're Petri dishes for this. People that never go to the movies, keep the movies shut down. That it's like, you know, or the ones that never go to a restaurant, keep the restaurants closed because they got no skin in the game, right? And so, you know, so that's a secondary gain, you know. And honestly, it's fun to do, just try this. Someone posted like, wow, with all these lockdowns, something, you know, I'm proud to admit that my life hasn't changed at all. You know, and I usually post, I feel sad for you. You know, what would it be like? But that was not healthy and they unfriended me. That was on Facebook. But it's like, you know, has my life changed drastically? This was going to be a very busy year for me doing trainings, right? A couple of the 3 conferences already been canceled, right? And yes, they can do them online, but it's like, right? You know, so anyway, it's just, is there a secondary gain? So when people are going through this, you know, what's going on, right? So I'm just calling it this. I just wanted to talk about it, and maybe in a couple of weeks we could do one where I'll get with some people, we'll have a panel discussion, especially people that's worked with post-traumatic stress. What can you do to get people back to normal, right? And if you ever dealt with post-traumatic stress, it's not you're disavowing what they went through, whether it was a combat situation, a car crash, a violent episode, you know, whatever it was. You're not just that, you got to reframe it in their mind so they can be functional. So that's just something I wanted to talk about. Well, let me turn the recording off and we'll discuss it.